It's your time to move things forward. U.S. Army Reserve.
While students are out on the beach enjoying their spring break, the grind never stops for LSU football. This past weekend was a huge successful weekend for recruiting for head coach Brian Kelly in LSU. With more than 50 top recruits that came for this past weekend on campus, Brian Kelly and the coaching staff won't be stopping anytime soon to build up this football program. For today's episode, I'll be having Billy Embody from On3.com to talk about this recruiting weekend with Jeff Palermo and Todd Horne. This is Camryn Conner, and after this commercial, we'll be right back.
I think that most people that contact the 90-Day Lifeline are looking to be heard and to feel seen.
Anybody that calls here to talk about anything that has them upset, we will talk to them.
Even on our chat and text services, you will be actually chatting and texting with a real person.
We have enough resources to be able to help people in any type of situation.
We have helpline specialists that are trained to handle the variety of calls that we get.
It's a very laid-back thing. We're not judging anybody. We're just a listening ear that some people don't have.
Billy Embody from On3.com joins us now. Billy, welcome to the show. How you doing tonight?
Doing well, guys. How are you?
Oh, doing amazing, doing well. This is the fun time of the year when all these sports are converging and on top of each other, and you always got recruiting, so that never slows down. This past weekend, obviously a successful weekend. It resulted in a commitment for LSU. Let's kind of give us, for the fans that or listeners that are hearing us and saying, what the heck happened this weekend, give us an idea of what went down on LSU's campus.
And this was a massive recruiting weekend for LSU, getting some of their top targets in Baton Rouge just to kick off spring practice. And there was a 7-on-7 tournament in New Orleans as well that allowed some guys to basically mix in a visit that they would have had to pay for themselves on their own if they would have tried to made it work another weekend. So they got to, knock one off with some national guys as well. But, they had Bryce Underwood in, the number one overall prospect in the country. They had De'Corian Moore, the number one wide receiver in the country, 2 5-stars making their way back to campus. And they had multiple other top targets on campus, and we'll get into that. But the big story is, because he was a commitment, it was Charles Ross, the Houston North Shore 4-star linebacker, announcing that he was going to be playing his college football at LSU. This is a guy that Blake Baker offered recently, but had been recruiting and had been evaluating for quite some time. And when he got to LSU, he went and saw him pretty early on in January when he got out onto the recruiting trail, and ended up offering him shortly thereafter. They got a visit on the books, and it impressed CJ as he goes by enough to get him to announce his commitment. So LSU gets back into that Houston area that they've had some success in, and a high school they've had success at over the last few years, and gets a guy who's on the rise. He's about 6'2", 200, but he's clocked multiple sub-11 100-meter times, which is moving for a linebacker. He runs around the 10.5 100-meter time, which is, again, really impressive. So he's got the speed, plays on one of the best football teams in the entire state of Texas and in the country. So this is a big name that will move up, in my opinion, in the recruiting rankings with other services in particular, and will be, I think, one of the top linebackers in the country when it's all said and done.
Billy, there was also a big-time number 1 rated defensive back, cornerback in that Corey Raymond's kind of close with. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. DJ Pickett, the 5-star defensive back from the state of Florida, was also there. That's his second visit, I think, in the last 2 months. Since Corey got to LSU, he's made him a priority. And there's some that feel around DJ that he might want to very well take his talents out of state. 4 of his top 5 schools are from out of state, but some of those in-state schools in Florida are hanging around for him. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. But still, LSU has really ascended to be, I would say, and a lot of people around DJ say, the team to beat. And so that's a very good thing for a secondary that needs to continue to be rebuilt. He's the number 1 corner in the country for On3 Sports, and is a really intriguing prospect with his length, his size, and what he brings to the table on both sides of the ball. There's some people that feel like he can play wide receiver at the next level, but he has been a big priority for Corey Raymond. And speaking of guys that made it back to campus for a second visit to see a new defensive coach in the last 2 months, Zion Williams, the 4-star defensive tackle from the state of Texas, was back on campus to see Bo Davis. And he had just visited LSU in January and turned right around and made the shorter trip from East Texas to get to LSU. But it's been a priority for him to visit LSU. He's a big man. And one of the biggest, targets in size that Bo Davis has, and we know LSU needs to address the interior of that defensive line, and they sit in a really good spot to snag him out of the state of Texas.
So all told, there were about a little over 50 recruits that were actually on campus this weekend.
Yes, that between all kind of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe a couple on Sunday. But they were working it between spring practices and hosting recruits. They had their hands full. It was all hands on deck. This is one of those weekends that they really, make their money in a way, between trying to bring in commitments and also get guys you're targeting to open up and say, you know what, I am going to commit. And so I think they built positive momentum with quite a few prospects that they've hosted. They had the number 1 and number 2 linebackers in the country for on-3 on campus as well. Jonah Williams out of Galveston Ball and Tavion Wallace out of the Peach State were both on campus. And Jonah is being recruited by LSU at safety. He's also a big baseball guy, so he'll, if he does end up at LSU, maybe test the waters on that front as well. But they've got a staff that we've seen it on the offensive side of the ball. They've for the most part been around since the beginning of the Brian Kelly era. We've seen some of these defensive coaches come together really well because they've either worked together in the past or they're Louisiana guys, or they just get it from a recruiting standpoint, and they have good recruiting boards that they already had stacked up. And we've seen them capitalize on that and build a lot of momentum. And I think this past weekend was a big example of that.
So out of those 50 or so that came in, like you said, over the 4 days, 3 or 4 days, were most of them juniors? So meaning they'll be 2025 signees either at LSU or wherever they go, or was there a mixture of some younger kids as well?
Yeah, most of them were 2025s from what we have pretty much seen. There were some guys that came in with 7-on-7 teams, and
Right.
they hosted some groups and things like that, and they ended up dishing out a couple offers to, I think, a 2026 running back, Tyreek Quinn, I think, off the top of my head. He's from Georgia, from the Marietta area. He's a really impressive Tyreek Green. He's a really impressive running back from the state of Georgia. They offered him. They also offered Mario Nash, who's a 2025. So they dished an offer out to an offensive lineman from Mississippi, and Mario, who visited for a game this fall. They had Aaron Gregory, the number 1 wide receiver in the entire country. So they had, Decoria Moore back, who was the number 1 wide receiver in the country. They had Jamie French, another elite wide receiver in the 2025 class, Caleb Cunningham, another 5-star receiver in 2025. And then they hosted Aaron Gregory, the top 10 prospect and number 1 wideout in the 2026 class. So they did it both in 2025 and 2026, and probably a couple 2027s that they really had in to prioritize. And I mean, it was just a big weekend on the national scale, but they also did a good job in Louisiana. They had 2026 4-star safety Aiden Hall, and 2026 4-star defensive lineman Richard Anderson, both from Edna Carr, who are really, really good prospects and considered pretty heavily leaning to LSU. And they had them on campus for practice. So they've done a good job just continuing to stack these visits up. And that's not to mention they had James Simon, who, if you ask most people in Louisiana, they would hope that James Simon would get on board with LSU in the near future as their other 2025 in-state running back commit.
Is there any insight as to whether he's leaning this way further now, or is he still pretty much open?
Yeah, I think he's been an LSU lean for a while. I do feel like he, being a coach's son, is just more apt to probably enjoy the process a little bit more and ask the right questions and really continue to dive into where things stand with these programs he's evaluating. Notre Dame, Texas A&M have been some of the programs he's been considering. Florida's another one. But most people you talk to think that he's going to end up staying in state at LSU. And if for some reason he doesn't, and again, that would kind of be a surprise to me, but most people would see LSU turning around and going up to Ash and or Alexandria and offering JT Lindsey, a really talented 4-star running back who's really picked up the recruiting steam a little bit, and he was in town for a visit with Frank Wilson as well.
Are they concerned at all? We know we've talked before. I believe we talked to you for a while about it, about holding the foundation of this class together because it's so far out. And I know Bryce Underwood seems to be strongly committed, but DeCorian Moore is taking some visits to some big schools like Oregon and a couple other places. Is there any concern about that right now, or any panic at all?
I don't think concern and panic is probably the right words to use, just because, like you mentioned, it is so far out. And these guys, especially DeCorian, are 5 stars, number 1 receiver in the country. So if nobody else is coming after him like that, then, maybe there is something wrong with the player in some cases. But that's not the case with DeCorian Moore. He's elite. And so they will have to fend off some of these pushes from a Texas and Oregon, Ohio State. But I just saw him at Under Armour Dallas. He was pretty adamant that, this is the place for him now. We know recruiting. It can get a little weird, a little squirrely, but that's why you have, Jamie French and Caleb Cunningham and some of these other top receivers in the country come in and visit with Bryce Underwood, so that, not only could you recruit a group of super receivers with DeCorian Moore, Teron Francis, and if they can snag a couple of other of these elite guys, but you can keep bringing these guys in to say, hey, well, you can be catching passes no matter what from Bryce Underwood. Come form, another Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors type of passing trio with him. And Bryce is really locked in. I mean, from what I understand, he's not taking calls from other schools and he's not taking any other visits. So we'll see. I mean, it's recruiting. You never know, but don't want somebody to come and clip this and get rid of me after something happens. But things in Bryce Underwood world seem to be really, really good shape.
Sounds good. Hey, Billy, thanks a lot, man, for carving out some time to talk with us. Always great catching up on recruiting with you. Got all the insight. Thanks a lot. We appreciate your time tonight.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
The East Baton Rouge Library says this is the year to invest in you. The library brings value by connecting you to information, resources, materials, technology, and experiences. We make a positive difference in your life. All you need is your library card. Stop by one of our 14 locations, open 7 days a week, or find us online at ebrpl.com.
All right, that's it for today's episode. Stay tuned to TigerRag.com for more LSU sports updates, and I'll be back later this week.